All right, a little production value for you this week. We're moving up in the world. Got a little bit of a production budget finally. But welcome to another week here on the Whiskey Gingers podcast. As always, I'm Brendan. He's Chris. We're your hosts. But today it's not about us. Not even close. Today's the episode we've been teasing, talking about, alluding to for, God, it feels like almost a month now. We are finally joined by Dave, the founder of Proof and Wood. Dave, thank you so much for joining the show, man. It's an honor to have you here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And thank you for the care package of whiskey. We talked it up on the. You would have thought we were kids on Christmas morning. It came before Christmas, but it sure as hell felt like it.
It was an absolutely loaded care package, and you know what? We're enjoying every second of it so far, and Brandon's going to be enjoying some more of it today.
Yes, that's what I've been holding on to. But I want to get your thoughts on that in a second. But before we get down to the whiskey side of things, just give us a little bit of background on what Proof and Wood is. What you guys are about, some of the origin story. Just take it from the top.
Origin story, huh? How far back you want to go?
As far back as you're comfortable with.
As far back as you find interesting.
I'll give you the quick story. I don't know how much of it is interesting, but I guess the origin story, started with working in a lot of bars and restaurants a long time ago and seeing every bar promotion under the sun from one side of the bar or the other. And from there, I created a marketing agency to work only with liquid brands. So we worked with a bunch of major spirit companies, most notably Absolut Vodka, when they were kind of the top of heap of the vodka world. Now they just sell a few million cases, no big thing.
How the mighty have fallen.
Yeah, little work with Anheuser-Busch and Captain Morgan and Alizé and those kind of things. And like any good actor, you think you know how to direct. So after a few years doing that, I launched a vodka brand that was a great way to find out what I didn't know about this business.
Sure.
And it was a lot, but it was a good education, I suppose. Along the way, I picked up kind of a taste for rye whiskey in particular. That's a whole other story. Another thing that was really interesting, this business looks really easy. And I like to say it's a low barrier to entry. Or, you can get yourself a little brand with minimal, capital and that kind of thing, but a high barrier to success. So along the way, you wind up meeting other people who were doing kind of similar things. And this is probably, the early 2000s. And so there would be people like myself who were kind of brand owners, contract manufacturers, people who were importing products that they fell in love with overseas and wanted to bring them to the States. And then kind of the growing micro distilling world, which was, pretty new at that point in the time. So I wanted making a lot of friends and kind of commiserating challenges there. From there, seeing the challenge of getting, small brands out into the world, I created an event called the Indie Spirits Expo, which is kind of a little showcase we did in New York to give small brands a kind of a stage to show what they're doing to both the trade and consumers. So we did that in New York, I think around 2005, 2006. Still do it in Chicago and New Orleans. And so I've got a lot of friends and connections who are also kind of doing the crazy thing, trying to create their own spirits brand. So I was doing that for a while. And then in 2010, 2009, 2010, my friend Mike opened a small bottling facility in Bardstown. And we put that together with the help of a lot of local folks, most notably Dave Pickrell, who is instrumental in MacGyvering the place together. And we drank a lot of whiskey while doing that. And that was kind of, we decided we wanted to do something in the whiskey world together, myself and Mike, who owned the bottling facility. And we, like to say, we stumbled upon the old Seagram's distillery, which, it's huge and enormous, but nobody really talked about it back then. And of course, it was then known as LDI and now known as MGP, or I think they changed the name to Crockett and Tubbs or something. But any event, we found the rye whiskey that became Redemption Rye, and we started that in 2010. And it was kind of a little side project. We thought we'd sell a couple of bottles of rye whiskey because rye whiskey wasn't that big, but we knew, we saw it growing. We just didn't see how big it was going to grow. And that was kind of a 5-year roller coaster ride where we built the brand and, the whiskey business. One thing going on is that the more successful you are, the broker you become. You're paying taxes, and then as you're growing, you've got to buy whiskey today to sell it years down the road. So we got to the point where we just couldn't grow it ourselves anymore, and we wound up selling it in 2015. And kind of right away, I don't think I was kind of done with what we were doing. So I founded Proof and Wood to kind of continue on that whiskey journey. And the name Proof and Wood comes from my great grandparents on my mother's side, Ezekiel Wood and Jebediah Proof. That's not true.
Being from PA, you had me going for a second. There's a ton of Ezekiels out here.
Sorry about that. The real story is I don't distill. Proudly source whiskey, and Proof and Wood alludes to some of the things that as an independent bottler I have control of, how long it's been in the barrel in the wood, and what proof we bottle it at. And the idea was the main theme is good whiskey in a bottle at a fair price. And that's what we try to do at every price level, whether it's, Deadwood bourbon and roulette rye in kind of the $30 price point range, or, we did something we did a 25-year-old American light whiskey for $350.
Wow.
But there's always value in that bottle.
That's amazing. Well, it sounds like you've built up quite a reputation for getting it right, because that's a long time coming.
You got to make mistakes before you get it right.
Absolutely. And I mean, speaking of mistakes in there, one of the questions that we'd love to ask you, and you've encompassed some of it in your speech here, but what are some of the biggest challenges that you've seen throughout growing the business? And do you find that not having the distilling factor of itself is a challenge, or do you prefer the fact that you're only in the bottling game at that point?
And just before you answer that, I want to piggyback off that question, because they are tied in. Before we get to the present moment with the sourcing, I'm a huge football guy. I'm curious, and they always talk about your welcome to the NFL moment. I'm really curious to find out what was your welcome to the business moment, whether it be when you launched your first brand or this brand. It was just kind of that first, oh, we're really doing this kind of event.
I mean, I think the first thing that I could really think about is being, kind of that, wow, this is really happening, is with that first vodka brand. After, I'm not sure how long it took me, a year or 2 years, of working on what was going in the bottle, working on the package, to see these bottles that I created kind of on a bottling line, and like, well, this looks real. And then, it really never gets old, seeing a bottle on a shelf or on a bar that you brought to the world. You're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And even, almost 10 years after I sold the brand, it's still kind of cool to see, Redemption growing and that kind of thing, even though I have nothing to do with it anymore.
You have a part in it, and that's an amazing feeling to have.
Can be, yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And do you find, just to go back on the focus of our show as well, we like to incorporate, a whiskey while we're talking about it, and what better time to do that than the present, because we do have one of your Proof and Wood whiskeys here with us. Brandon's going to be so kind as to sample that for us today, as I'm feeling a bit under the weather, so I'm not going to be able to partake and join him as we normally would. But he'll be my tasting expert today, and I think that would be great for us, Dave, is if you can kind of give us a little bit of a rundown as Brandon's going through this of what he should be expecting from this particular bottle. And Brandon, if you'd be so kind as to tell everybody what you're going to be partaking in today.
Yeah, so we have the cabinet from Proof and Wood. It is a blended straight whiskey bottled in 2023. And I have purposely done very little research on this because I've been saving it for the episode that we had Dave with us. And I'd rather have Dave tell me a story than me read a book.
Okay, so when I'm telling you a story, probably at least half of it's going to be true. So
like all good stories are.
Unfortunately, I don't have a bottle of the cabinet here in my house. They're all at the office. I had one bottle at home, but a friend came over the weekend, and I no longer have that one bottle. But
funny how that happens, ain't it?
I'm pouring myself a little of this. This is our Tumbling Dice Double Oak, which we did last year.
Like the sound of that.
Yeah, I'd like to tell you it was an intentional project. But our standard Tumbling Dice is a 4-year-old 100 proof whiskey. And we were bottling it during COVID. I think it was 2020 in the summertime. And we had more liquid from our barrels because we don't always know what's coming out of that barrel. Then we had glass, and we couldn't get more glass right away. So it proofed it down to 100 proof, and we just put it back into 8 barrels, what we had left over, with the intention of blending that into our next batch of standard 4-year-old 100 proof. Somehow we forgot about that. I didn't find it till last year. And it was really, well, first of all, it had a total at 8 years of age, but 4 of those years was at a lower proof and 100 proof. So we got a lot of kind of mellower, sweeter flavors out of it, fewer kind of tannins that you'll pick up from wood at a higher proof. So we bottled it as double oaked. And as you can see, 4 years in the original barrel and 4 years in the second barrel.
Amazing. So some would say a happy accident.
Yeah. I mean, that's the great thing about whiskey. You sometimes get something you didn't expect, but it's better than what you were planning on doing.
Absolutely.
So, cheers.
Cheers.
So,
Whoa.
So the cabinet.
I want to hear all about it because I'm fascinated right now for sipping.
So the cabinet is part of our DC collection, and the DC collection, kind of a appropriate week to talk about this. The DC collection started in DC. Shocking. My distributor there said to me many years ago, "Hey, I grew up in DC, live there now. The one thing I can say, no matter who wins the election, the inauguration is always a great big party. And DC is a great hospitality town. And, could I come up, can I find a 4-year-old whiskey and an 8-year-old whiskey, and we'll call them 1 term and 2 term." So I did that under the name Presidential Dram. And we did that in the DC area only. The first time we went, we did that. And it was a pretty quick sellout. And as things went on, I used that kind of label for some special items. Like we had the Ambassador, which was a 12-year-old bourbon. The Justice was a 14-year-old and a 16-year-old batch of Tennessee bourbon. And then our Representative, which is a 4-year-old bourbon, and the Senator, a 6-year-old rye. Those, like their namesakes, are always for sale. which is my political humor for the evening. So that's where those came from. One of our bigger retailers came to us and said, "Hey, can you do a blend? Call it the Cabinet." So I played around with that also during COVID, and about a year later, I came up with pretty much that basic blend. We did one in 2022 and that one in 2023. There's bourbon and rye in there, so it's a brew rye between 5 and 9 years old. My taste tends to lean heavy towards rye, so it's about 75% rye in there. But it's really cool. You get the rye up front and then the bourbon undertones as you dip through it.
Yeah, 100%. It was one of those ones. I mean, people are going to think I'm hamming it up because you're on the show. But that reaction was completely genuine because, honest to God, and Chris knows me, I always lean Irish whiskey, and I like some of the more milder, kind of smokier bourbons. And I'm like, I'm doing this show. I got the founder on the show. I open this bottle, and it smells like it should hit you harder than it does. And in my head, I'm like, all right, man, you got game face, hold it together. Like, you got to stone face this. I took a sip of it, and it was genuine reaction. It was wow. Because I went in thinking, all right, got to make sure you look like you like it, and I loved it.
You don't have to like everything. I think it's 112 proof. Am I right there?
Yep.
Yeah.
I think what's interesting about it as well is through this whole journey, Brandon and I have been doing this for about, would you say, Brandon, 2.5 years or so now? We've been
Some would say season 2.
Season 2. We've been trying these different whiskeys as much as we could, a different whiskey every time, and I feel like we've achieved that. And I think that it's really expanded both of our palates and finding what we like in a whiskey and what we don't like in a whiskey. Traditionally, Brandon was accurate in saying that he preferred the Irish whiskeys, and one thing that you didn't like for a long time, Brandon, was rye whiskeys.
Yeah.
And I think that what's interesting about it is we're finding out you can't umbrella term a certain type of whiskey and say that you're not going to like it every single time. There's bourbons that I love. There's bourbons that I don't. There's ryes that I love. There's ryes that I don't. But I will say that, as Brandon said, without coming off as we're trying to butter you up, I do think that the Polish rye that I had previously, the Stranger, was delicious from your brand, and it sounds like the Cabinet is also a winner as well. I know that's a blended one, but it sounds like it's got a strong note of rye. So there are ryes out there that we may feel more strongly about.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think the category has exploded. 15 years ago, there were not very many rye whiskeys available.
Sure.
Commercially, probably 10 to 20.
Okay.
And then now, every small distiller has one. The bigger companies have created many expressions of rye. Rye was kind of forgotten about. I think, like some of the big distilleries, they did a half a day's production of rye every year at best. And a lot of it was kind of the same kind of mash bill. And that's evolved quite a bit.
I was going to say, so in your experience, do you see that coming to more of a household place? If you're going to have a whiskey collection, do you think a rye is going to be on people's shelf more often than not going forward in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting. Again, I think when we started in 2010 with Redemption, there were, like maybe 20,000 cases of rye sold a year, and now it's well over 1 million. But it still is dwarfed by bourbon, and
Sure.
There's still pockets of people who are no, I'm only going to drink bourbon. I don't like rye, and there's an inherent similarity. I mean, the rules are the same. The bourbon's got to be 51% corn, rye's got to be 51% rye. So everything else is really going to be similar. We're using the same kind of barrels. We're using the same distilling techniques. So there's flavors in rye, American rye whiskey, that bourbon drinkers are going to recognize. And then you've got, some ryes have, a lot of corn in them. So they're very close to bourbon. And then we do some bourbons with a lot of rye. So there's a lot of cross-pollination there.
It's amazing that you can achieve that. I mean, you're targeting multiple audiences, and it's kind of that way in of saying, we know you like this, but why don't we just sprinkle a little bit of this in there and see if we can kind of coax you in on our side a little bit. I think
We
that's
try.
a cool
We
thing.
try.
What are
It
your
is.
thoughts, Brandon? You've had quite a few minutes to sip on that.
I love it. Yeah, I was very honest before. I love it. I think we've had a couple blends. I can't off the top of my mind remember which some of the other ones are in my liquor cabinet. But what's interesting about this one is that I think there's not a gentle transition from one to the next. Like it is a two clearly delineated flavors that you're getting. You're getting the rye up front, and like I said, for somebody who doesn't like rye, I enjoy this all the way through. But then there's like a noticeable shift to the bourbon on the back. And for something that is 112 proof, I mean, this could be potentially a problem if you were thirsty. Like it's not, it is something that is borderline thirst quenching. It doesn't burn. There's no like acidy feel or anything like that. It's a really nice, enjoying whiskey. Now, before we get to the let's drink about it portion, if you're, I haven't looked, but every time we do kind of like a special whiskey, we have kind of different categories. We have, keep it in the house whiskey. We have share with your buddies whiskey, and then we have, special event whiskey. In your opinion, when you look at the cabinet, when you were creating it, which one of those three categories do you think it falls into?
What are the categories again?
It is, house standard, keep it in at all times whiskey. You have stuff you share with your buddies, like, hey, I got something new, try this out. And then you have special event whiskey, weddings, engagements, births, stuff of that nature.
I mean, I'd like to think all three, but it's kind of a special event whiskey, but I hope it still falls under the share with your buddies kind of whiskey, which is what all whiskey should be.
To be fair, I suppose it will be, because we'll be sharing it and we're buddies, so that's all that matters.
And I accidentally did a great segue into our Let's Drink About It of the day. And it's usually one question, but this week I want to get into a couple. But we only had 3 guests on, and we always ask the same question right off the bat. Where do you find yourself enjoying whiskey the most? Is it by yourself at home? Are you in a dimly lit dive bar? Are you at barbecue, a holiday? Like, where, if you could create the perfect whiskey drinking scenario, where are you sitting at or standing at?
I mean, it's again, I think it's about who you're with. So, definitely either at home or in, dive bar or backyard or just something. And again, it's about sharing kind of experiences with people that you like. Sometimes people you don't like, but you're enjoying the whiskey, and you have that in common.
You're more so interested in the company rather than the location, we'll say in this case, which I think is a very fair point.
Yeah, I mean, right, you are. It was cool over the summer. Chris, Jeff, and I all took a cruise together with our significant others, and we found a wine bar that would do whiskeys that Chris and I would never dream of purchasing on our own. I mean, I think we topped out at a $400 bottle of Macallan. So it was cool getting to share those moments that we would have never treated ourselves to with your buddies, and drinking probably the best whiskey that we'll ever have. I know, at least for myself. So you're right, you are about it, who you drink it with.
It has a lot to do with company. I mean, I think that's one cool thing about where these certain industries go. I mean, we see a lot of on social media representation for whiskey. There is a community that's behind it, and that's kind of cool. Whenever you follow a page or you see these other whiskey people out there for social media, they all have conversations with each other. They all share their opinions on how they taste these flavors and what they taste in these flavors. And it's cool to have some type of company in the whole thing. It definitely makes it worth it, because you could have a $500 bottle sitting there, and if you're the only one drinking it, you don't have any way to discuss that with people, kind of loses a lot of its
yeah. I find, I mean, there's a lot of there can be a lot of negativity with people on, and I'm not judging or anything, but on the secondary market and people getting into it for those reasons. But the flip side is it's an incredibly generous community. There are people who just go out of their way to share bottles and experiences with other whiskey fans. And some of the coolest things I've seen is, again, you look at some of the dollar values attached to some great bottles, and you shake your head. And I've been to auctions where somebody will buy a bottle for 4 or 5 figures. And, and often there's a charity component, not always. And at the auction, they'll open it up and share it with people.
That's cool.
That was their purpose. They weren't buying it because I think, obviously we see this too, and this drives a little bit that people are buying it. Hopefully that next year they'll sell it for more money at another auction. But seeing that generosity and people sharing what they have it is kind of a cool thing.
Absolutely.
I think we've done a great job through 26 minutes of covering, a lot of knowledgeable stuff, a lot of industry stuff, and it's been a phenomenal episode that way. But I mean, we'd be remiss while we have you here to not get to know at least the littlest bit about the man behind the whiskey. So I want to just find out a little bit more about you, Dave, yourself. Do you have any great, war stories or bar stories or from your travels in this liquor business after all these years? I'm sure you had to have seen some things.
I mean, probably too many things to pick one out, and it all blends together, except when it doesn't.
It blends together like a whiskey, I guess, in a sense. I know when we were trying to set this up previously, and I think you were in Philly for a tasting, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
When you're in town, what are some places you like to see? Or maybe what are some of your partner bars, your distributors, or what's kind of your tie to Philly?
Well, if we're talking Philly, it had been a long time since I've been in Philly. And we don't sell a tremendous amount in Pennsylvania just yet.
We're working on it.
Yeah, it's the control state, which we could talk about for a while. But the way I look at it, it's a state stealing for private enterprise, and in a lot of ways. And the real challenging thing is the people making the decisions. I shouldn't blanket and say they don't care about the product, because I definitely met some people at the PCLB who do care about whiskey. But in general, for them, it's very numbers oriented. It's not, this is a really cool whiskey, a really well done whiskey at a good price, and we can sell a little bit of it because we know it's good, which is what you deal with in an open state, where the distributor is going to have that attitude, and then we find retailers who like what we do and hand sell it, because we're not a household name, so we kind of count on that. It's more challenging in a control state like Pennsylvania. The cool thing is after the tasting in Philly, we went to a cigar bar.
Okay.
On top of, what's the famous cigar store in Philly?
Oh my God, man, I know a lot about Philly, but
well, they have a lot of they have a lot of cigar internationals in Pennsylvania in general. It's kind of like a cigar superstore. I don't know if that would happen to be.
No,
probably a local spot. Holt Cigar.
Yeah. So there's a lounge on top of Holt Cigar, and it was a very pleasant surprise to find that they had the representative behind the bar.
Nuts. That was unplanned. You went in there and found out.
Yep. Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah.
So
and the representative has been our best selling bottle for the last 2 years, after we won the best bourbon in the world at the World Whiskey Awards.
Hell yeah.
See how I slipped that in?
Yeah. Humble brag.
Dave, do you happen to know if you have better representation for whiskey sales for your brand in like New Jersey or Delaware? They seem to be better for Brandon and I to find. other sorts of smaller end whiskeys. So, and it's easier for us to find them there. Pennsylvania, as we've kind of discussed in length here, is harder to find. So I'm just
Yeah,
curious
we
if you
do.
knew.
We have room to grow in both Jersey and Delaware, but we do all right there.
Okay.
We're much more represented in Delaware and DC and New York.
Okay.
Well, sounds like Brandon and I have some connections either way to get some more
Yes.
proof in wood.
Last question before we let you go. I promised we'd be in and out of here around the half hour, and we're just there now. But when you mentioned winning at the Worlds, I had a follow-up question to that one. It could be when you had your own brands. It could be now with the sourcing. But talk to me about a whiskey that you really thought might have done a little bit better, like one where it came out and you thought you were on like the cutting edge, or this was going to sell like gangbusters, and the public just didn't.
Okay. The first bottle that I put in that category, I don't know about gangbusters, but I thought it would get more traction than it did. About 2 years ago, I did a blend. And blends are a tricky word in this country. But it's called Cross Border Jackpot. And it's a blend of 3 whiskeys. All of them are 7 years old. And there's a Canadian rye, an American rye, and a Canadian light corn whiskey. And the corn, it's sweeter, it's lighter, and the rye kind of bounce off of it. It's really fun. It's a fun whiskey. Retails about $70. They're not crazy expensive, but people didn't know what to do with it on the retail end. In terms of like, where do you put it? It's not American, it's not Canadian. And when people hear the word blend, they think of blended whiskey, which in general is like American blended whiskey. Definition, could be as much as 80% grain neutral spirit or vodka. So, and they're not necessarily bad. I mean, they have their place, but they're not a high quality whiskey that most people think of. So when you see the word blend, you don't think that, oh, it's a blend like the cabinet you just had. That's all straight whiskey, right? It's a quality whiskey, but people hear the word blend and they get scared. So that would probably be, kind of the first one like that.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thanks for taking us down that trip. I didn't want to take away from the highlight that was the winner at the Worlds, but I'm always so fascinated to hear from creative people, which one of their ideas, the public just saw differently. And it always makes me really.
That's a common thing. Sometimes it's benign. I was pointing out the tumbling dice before. And the tumbling dice sells really well. Our single barrel tumbling dice, it's one of our top lines. But from a creative standpoint, the dice represent how old they are, and I thought that was really obvious. Apparently, it's not. I
mark it that way.
When I mention it, people who know the brand are like, "Wow, I never realized that." And I'll be talking to people who have, a collection of age, from 4 to 9 years old with the dice on it, and they didn't make the connection. So our newest redesign actually says how old it is under the dice, just to make sure we don't lose out.
Awesome, dude. Well, Dave. Thank you so much for being a part of the episode, man. This has been even better than we had hoped for. You're a wealth of whiskey, bourbon, rye industry knowledge, and we just so appreciate you being on with us. We do have a lot of listeners in PA, New Jersey, and Delaware. Are there retailers where they should be on the lookout for you?
They can check the website and they can email. We'll obviously always help people find stuff. And then we've got a fair amount of representation where retailers will ship.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, take it from me. This is my 3rd different whiskey of yours I've tried. It is fantastic. So if you're
Great
one of
to
our
hear.
listeners in PA, New Jersey, Delaware, proofandwood.com is where to go to find out where you can get your hands on some of this stuff.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dave. It's been really enlightful to have you here.
Thanks a lot, guys.
All right. Well, this wraps up the most special of special editions of the Whiskey to Gingers podcast. Thanks to Dave from Proof and Wood. I'm Brandon. That's Chris. Dave left. We'll see you in 2 weeks.